A successful black businessman walked into the luxury hotel he owned, only to be humiliated by staff who refused him service, unaware he was their CEO. What began as a routine visit turned into a moment of reckoning that would shock everyone. But let's start from the beginning. The grand entryway of the downtown luxury hotel was a masterclass in opulence, designed to awe even the most jaded traveler. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above polished marble floors, their soft light bouncing off towering golden mirrors and lush floral arrangements. Gerald Washington stepped inside, his leather shoes tapping softly against the tiles. At 45, he carried himself with a quiet assurance, the kind earned through years of navigating corporate boardrooms and commanding respect. Dressed in a tailored navy blue suit and carrying a sleek briefcase, Gerald looked every bit the successful businessman he was, though he preferred his achievements to speak louder than his attire. This hotel wasn't just another stop for Gerald. It was his newest acquisition, the jewel in the crown of his global hotel chain. He had come unannounced to see the property through the eyes of an ordinary guest. It was a strategy he had relied on throughout his career, experiencing his hotels as any customer would, to identify gaps and opportunities for improvement. As Gerald walked through the lobby, he noticed it. The glances, the whispers. Staff members exchanged looks, and a few guests paused mid-conversation, their expressions shifting. Gerald was used to the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, judgments that followed him in spaces like this. Still, he pressed on, his face calm and unreadable, as he approached the sleek mahogany reception desk, where two young employees, Claire and Jason, stood. Claire, her platinum blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, glanced up, her polite smile faltering into something cooler, more guarded. Beside her, Jason, a wiry man with a crisp uniform and an expensive watch, glanced nervously at the computer screen before him. "Can we help you?" Claire asked, her voice tinged with impatience. "Yes, I'd like to check in," Gerald said, offering a friendly nod as he slid his reservation details across the counter. Jason took the paper, his fingers hesitating over the keyboard, his brow furrowed as he stared at the screen. "I'm sorry, sir," Jason said finally, his voice stiff, "but we don't have any available rooms tonight." Gerald frowned slightly. "That's strange. I made a reservation a week ago." His voice remained calm, though his eyes narrowed slightly. Claire stepped in, her tone turning from indifferent to outright frosty. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in one of the hotels down the street," she said, her words slow and deliberate, the implication hanging heavy in the air. The moment froze. Around them, a few guests glanced over, their unease palpable, but no one intervened. Gerald's jaw tightened, though he maintained his composure. For a moment, he considered explaining himself, perhaps even revealing his true identity. But no, this was exactly the kind of situation he needed to witness firsthand. Without a word, he nodded, turned on his heel, and walked back toward the gleaming entrance. The whispers followed him, but Gerald didn't break stride. His face betrayed nothing, but inside, he was already planning his next move. The cool evening air hit Gerald's face as he stepped outside the grand hotel entrance. His expression remained calm, but a fire burned behind his steady gaze. Taking a deep breath, he reached into his pocket for his phone, the device glinting under the soft glow of the streetlights. With practiced ease, he dialed the regional manager's number. "Good evening, Mr. Washington," came the slightly nervous voice on the other end. "Listen carefully," Gerald began, his voice steady, each word measured. "I want every department head in the conference room in 10 minutes. No exceptions." The regional manager stammered a quick, "Yes, sir," and the call ended. Pocketing his phone, Gerald turned back toward the lobby, his silhouette a study in quiet authority. Inside the hotel, confusion rippled like a quiet storm. Word of the sudden meeting spread quickly, drawing puzzled expressions from managers and staff alike. Claire and Jason, still manning the front desk, were among the last to be summoned. Jason adjusted his tie nervously, while Claire's polished facade slipped into something closer to unease. "What's this about?" Jason whispered, but Claire only shrugged, her lips pressed into a tight line. The conference room buzzed with low murmurs as the hotel's leadership filed in. Heads of housekeeping, food and beverage, maintenance, and guest services gathered, their conversations a mix of speculation and curiosity. Jason and Claire entered hesitantly, exchanging glances before taking seats toward the back. The moment Gerald entered, the air shifted. His presence filled the room, the quiet confidence in his stride demanding attention without him needing to utter a word. He paused at the front, his sharp suit pristine, his expression unreadable. "Good evening," he began, his voice firm but controlled, with a gravity that silenced the remaining whispers. "I'm Gerald Washington, the CEO of this hotel chain." A wave of surprise swept through the room, punctuated by audible gasps. Jason's face paled. Claire's carefully curated poise faltered as her eyes widened in recognition. Gerald continued, his tone unwavering. "Earlier this evening, I came to this hotel unannounced, as I often do with my properties. I wanted to experience the service we provide to our guests. Instead, I was refused service." The words hung heavy in the air, their weight sinking into every corner of the room. Gerald's gaze swept across the faces before him, lingering momentarily on Jason and Claire. The duo sat frozen, their expressions shifting between disbelief and dawning horror. "Refused service," Gerald repeated, the phrase sharp and deliberate, "because I didn't meet the assumptions of what a guest here should look like." Murmurs of shock erupted among the department heads. The head of guest services visibly recoiled, while the head of housekeeping looked down, shame flickering across her face. "Let me be clear," Gerald said, cutting through the murmurs. "This is not just about one incident. It's about what we stand for as a brand and the culture we foster in every one of our hotels. Today, this property failed that standard spectacularly, and now we will address it." His gaze settled on Claire and Jason, whose faces were ghostly white. Their eyes avoided his, but there was no escape from the weight of his words, or the room's judgment. Gerald stood at the head of the room, his sharp gaze scanning the faces before him. The tension was palpable, the air heavy with unspoken guilt and discomfort. No one dared to move. "I want to hear from everyone," he said, his voice steady but piercing. "How do we ensure every guest is treated with dignity and respect? Speak up." The room remained silent, each manager seemingly hoping the spotlight would fall on someone else. Finally, Jason, his face pale and his voice trembling, spoke up. We thought—" "You thought what?" Gerald interrupted, his tone slicing through the air like a blade. He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on Jason, with an intensity that made the young man shrink into his chair. "That I didn't belong? That my skin color determined my worth as a guest?" Jason opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked to Claire for support, but she was staring down at the table, her hands clasped tightly together. I mean, we didn't know." Jason stammered again, his voice faltering. Gerald raised a hand, silencing him. "Enough," he said coldly. "This is not about what you didn't know. This is about what you assumed. You assumed I was out of place, and instead of treating me with the courtesy and professionalism We claim to provide to all our guests. You chose to treat me with suspicion and disrespect." The room felt suffocatingly quiet. No one dared to meet Gerald's eyes. Claire finally spoke, her voice thin and unconvincing. "We're sorry, Mr. Washington. It was a mistake." Gerald's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing. "It wasn't a mistake," he said, his words deliberate and cutting. "It was a choice, and choices like that reflect on every member of this team and this brand. This isn't just about the two of you. It's about a culture that allowed this behavior to go unchecked." He let his words sink in, the weight of his disappointment pressing down on the room. "The choices you made tonight," Gerald continued, his voice now quieter, but no less powerful. "Tell me and every other guest who walks through those doors exactly what kind of experience they can expect. That is unacceptable. It goes against everything we stand for as a company, and it undermines every person in this room who works hard to uphold our values." A murmur of agreement rippled among the department heads, though none spoke aloud. Gerald turned his attention to the group as a whole. "So, I'll ask again," he said, his tone softening, but his gaze no less intense. "How do we ensure this never happens again? How do we create a culture where every guest, regardless of who they are or what they look like, feels valued and respected?" The room shifted uneasily as Gerald waited for answers. One by one, heads of departments began to speak, their voices tentative at first, but growing stronger as they suggested actionable changes. Gerald listened intently, his sharp focus unyielding, determined to ensure that this incident would be the catalyst for transformation, not just a moment of regret. Over the next week, Gerald implemented mandatory training for all staff, focusing on implicit bias and customer service ethics. Claire and Jason were suspended without pay, with the option to return only after completing the program and demonstrating changed behavior. Months later, Gerald returned to the hotel, this time openly as the CEO. Claire, now more thoughtful and genuine, greeted him with a warm smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Washington. We're honored to have you here." For the first time, Gerald felt the sincerity in her words. The lobby, once tense and exclusionary, now bustled with diversity and warmth. Gerald nodded, satisfied. Change had begun, and this hotel, like many others in his chain, was becoming a beacon of inclusivity.